When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome, everybody, to Season 9 of Insatiable. This season, our theme is fertility. This topic often gets reduced to periods or pregnancy without regard to the physical, emotional, and soul process involved with our hormones, menstrual cycles, bodies, and identities, regardless if we choose to have children or not. In this season, we will take a holistic and integrated look at fertility to reveal you have more choices than most of us have been led to believe. Being in my 8th month of pregnancy, I'm now surprised I thought that Western medicine would be authoritative on fertility. It is just as fraught with fear tactics, outdated science, and siloed thinking as nutrition, weight loss, and wellness. My hope is we fill in the gaps you might not know are missing, have better questions to ask, and are able to get the results you want on your terms for your hormonal health, conception, pregnancy, birth, and the 4th trimester. This fertility theme is also the theme of our Insatiable membership community. We will spend fall, September, October, and November taking a deep dive into the physical, emotional, and soul aspects of fertility for your current life stage, whether you're trying for conception, perimenopause, or postmenopause, and how to sync our nutrition, lifestyle, including exercise and work, and creativity to be in sync with our fertility. More details on how to join at allieshapiro.com/IC2019. Today we have an extra special guest for episode 6 of season 9. We are talking about the 4th trimester with Kimberly Johnson. Before we get to that interview, let me tell you a little bit about her. Kimberly Ann Johnson is a sexological bodyworker, somatic experiencing trauma resolution practitioner, birth doula, and single mom. She specializes in helping women prepare for birth, recover from birth injuries and birth trauma, and heal from sexual trauma. She's the author of the best-selling book, The 4th Trimester, a postpartum guide to healing your body, balancing your emotions, and restoring your vitality. Just such an integrated and holistic look. I just can't wait to dive in. She is the creator of Activate Your Inner Jaguar, an online course ushering women into their full voices in sexual expression. Thank you so much for being here today, Kimberly.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we even get to what is the 4th trimester, because I think some people think there's 3 trimesters in pregnancy and then you're not. But you have a pretty remarkable story of why you even wrote the book, The 4th Trimester. So let's start with your own story.
I was like most women, and I did a lot of preparation for the birth, and I thought I was really prepared. I mean, I didn't read many books because that's not really my style, but I was swimming in the ocean every day, and I was spending some time with my midwives, and I thought that I had everything really together with that. And the birth went relatively well, but I hadn't planned for anything after I gave birth. And I was living in Brazil, married, just recently married, totally different culture. I'm American and I'm from San Diego. So within a year, I had like a different culture, a new relationship, a new baby. And then I had an injury from childbirth. So I was having all kinds of symptoms of basically pain and incontinence and just not really understanding what was going on. That snowballed like they often do. So then I was having difficulty with my milk supply because I was so stressed and I wasn't very mobile. So I couldn't make food for myself. And I hadn't planned for the fact that, I was living in a completely new place where I didn't know people and didn't have a community network. I had a home birth, which is what I always knew that I wanted. And I'm not someone who seeks out help from Western medicine very often, but I went to get a checkup to see what was going on. And they said, yep, you need a full pelvic floor surgical reconstruction. But they told me that without even looking at my pelvic floor. So I just thought there's got to be a better way. And I knew that what I was experiencing was not just personal. I knew it was kind of archetypal in a way. And I knew that when I Google searched, the only labels that were available was postpartum depression. And I was feeling kind of depressed, but I also was like, well, of course I'm depressed. I'm like pooping in my pants. I can't make enough breast milk for my baby. I can't get enough food to eat. Everything's different. And so I went on a long journey. My daughter's 12 now. It was about a 6.5-year journey of learning about how different cultures deal with women when they've had babies, and how we've lost a connection to what the real needs of a birthing person are after they give birth. And so along the way, I did find a couple of great books. I found Aviva Ram's book, Natural Health After Birth, in a used bookstore in Thailand. That was the real safety, life preserver that got thrown to me. And then sometime after that, I found Robin Lim's book, After the Baby's Birth, which was out of print. And I just thought, this is nuts. It's nuts that more people aren't talking about this. And I was already a yoga teacher, and I'm a Relfer, which is a kind of structural body work. So people started telling me their stories. My tailbone's been hurting ever since I had a baby 3 years ago, or I can't run anymore because I'm afraid I'm going to wet my pants. And then I would say, well, has anyone worked on you? And they'd say no. And I realized, wow, there's just this complete desert in women's healthcare that is postpartum care, because all you do is you have the baby, and then a majority of the care is just a 6-week visit. And what happens between the time that you gave birth and those 6 weeks is so incredibly important.
Yeah, that was, as I'm having conversations with a lot of my friends who are just having babies or have, had them in the past, they're like, if I could change anything, it's that I spent so much time preparing for the birth and not enough for this transition once the baby's born. And that's something that I've just heard universally. And I think to your point of we don't talk about this 4th trimester, so you don't know what you don't know. And then you feel so lost and overwhelmed and kind of think this is how it has to be in a way.
Yeah. Or we have a term for it now. So it's like, oh, well, I must have a mood disorder, or I must have, postpartum anxiety because so many women have started to speak out about their experiences. And there's been, huge, huge shifts in maternal health care and just awareness in the last 10 years since I even began this process. But unfortunately, it all gets categorized as mental health. If you're alone with a baby all day long, of course you're going to feel depressed. You're not supposed, just everything that a new baby needs, a new mom needs. A new mom needs attuned care. A new mom needs a constant food supply. A new mom needs touch. And we just think, oh yeah, we'll just have the baby, and then, sure, most people are like, yeah, well, my husband's off work for 7 to 12 days or something. And it's just like, okay, yeah. And then what? How are you going to get enough food? How are you going to go to the bathroom and take a shower? Who's going to take care of you? And we just completely lost that thread because of feminism and because of, the intersection between feminism and puritanical work ethics. We just think it's better to not need anything, and it's better to take care of ourselves. And everyone who hasn't done it yet, and I would probably include you, are going, yeah, okay, but I'm not like that. Yeah, okay, it's hard for other people, but I'm tough. I've been through stuff. And so we don't accept that this is one of the most crucial times in a woman who's having a child's life, for her long-term health, for the health of the relationship. More people are concerned about the mother-baby bond, and that is very important, but it's impossible if a woman is completely dysregulated, injured, and doesn't have any of the support that she needs.
Yeah, I love in your book how you talk about in Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine, which are so much more holistic and integrative pieces, that they view this as such a critical time to support a woman's long-term health. And I think that's something that people don't think about, right? To your point, they're just and I loved in your book also how you talked about the next wave of feminism, you says includes embodiment and pleasure, right? It's kind of and I was like, oh, and so can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that? Because I do think we have a pretty feminist crowd who listens to this. And again, when I was reading your book, I was thinking, I'll be able to get through it. And then you talked about willpower, self-sufficiency, and resourcefulness is not enough. And I was like, oh, she knows what we're thinking. And I think that's one of the things that I just took away from your book was like, we have to take this seriously. It's not just something to read and like process and intellectualize. Like, it's really something that we have to embody and make space for. And so can you talk a little bit about that embodiment and pleasure and what needs to happen in the fourth trimester so that this transition can be a healthy one for moms, babies, and the way we understand the type of care that women need?
Well, I'm glad that that's what you took away, because it's really true. It's not something that we can just think about. It's something that we experience, and it is something we can practice. So there are ways that we can come into the fourth trimester without being in shock. You know, so many women, the overarching thing women say is, nobody told me about this. I had no idea. And there is a truth to that, because even if someone listens to this conversation or reads the book, when you're going through it, it's just like you can't prepare someone 100% for childbirth because there's mystery in there, or like prepare someone for the greatest orgasm of their life. Like, you can do things that strengthen your capacity and that get you in touch with all of the ways that you experience yourself. You know, we can prepare. And how do we prepare for that? We learn how to rest, you know, really rest. And I spend a lot of time in Brazil. And now when I live in the US, when I go to Brazil, it always just cracks me up, because it's like, wow, this is a whole other level of resting. Like, I thought I knew how to rest. And then I go there and I'm like, no, these people know how to rest. You know, we're just so attached to productivity and our value being related to productivity and our measures for what's productive, because being a new mom is an extremely productive thing. I mean, you're producing milk to feed your child for the most part. You're repairing all of these levels of deep connective tissue and fascia. You're literally rebuilding your body and your organ system. It's extremely productive. It's just that we don't really count that, because we don't count the things you can't see. We count things you can see and quantify. It's why women freak out so much about breast milk, because you don't know how much milk's coming out of your breast, right? And then you pump, but that's not an accurate measure, because a lot of things change when you pump. So we have to start valuing ourselves and valuing beingness. Yeah. And so many women, you know, you said there's a lot of feminist listeners. Like, I'm a feminist, 100%. I'm raising a feminist. And the earlier phases of feminism that made this phase possible were like, we've got to act like men. We've got to do what men can do, and we've got to do it better. And a lot of that meant acting like men. And now we're in a place where we've seen, okay, this is where the pill got us, right? We've got like excess estrogen in our water supply now. We've got lots of women with fertility problems because they were on the pill for so long. We have the pill being used to regulate all kinds of things that have nothing to do with your reproductive cycle. It's like the cure-all for anything. And now it's like, wait, hold on. Maybe there's another way, you know? Maybe we can experience pleasure and experience connectedness, and we don't have to forego that so that we can accomplish or achieve something. The people who approach birth from that type A perspective, it's really hard, because I am a birth doula. I don't do many births at this point in my life, but I had a client once who brought me a 3-ring binder to our meeting, and it was like a 3-ring birth binder. And I just was like, oh God. Like, it was like I don't know if you've ever worked in production, but like if you work in line production, it was basically like a 3-ring binder with like all the XLs and stuff like that. So, and I've had clients say to me, it's so weird. Like, you know, you can plan the day of your wedding. Like, why shouldn't you be able to plan the day of your birth? We're just so out of touch with being out of control, you know? And if you live in Brazil, or you live in India, or you live in other places, you're used to dealing with things not working, basically. Like, you're used to dealing with like shit just taking a really long time. And so you develop that sense of like, it's not all about me. It's not all about how I think it should go and what I think is right and my morals and my ideology and my this. It's like sometimes things are just happening.
We had a Dr. Kelly Brogan, who I know you're friends with as well. On episode 1, she was talking about her 2 very different natural childbirths. And the first one, she was like, I was in my masculine and I was like, I'm going to do this. I have a plan, like almost approached it like a marathon. And the second one was just surrendering over to whatever is going to happen, like being completely in her feminine and just, really the contrast and experiences that were different when you just kind of surrender over to what's going to happen, right? And we are definitely not skilled at that in America. That's part of it. And again, the other reason I love your book and your work is you can go from this very granular, like in terms of like what you need in the 4th trimester, but you can also look at the metaphor and understand that you talked about basically the 4th trimester and birth and motherhood challenges these cultural tropes of individualism, sufficiency, like that we have to be superwoman, right? And this period of 4th trimester really brings out the shadow of what we're talking about in terms of productivity and bouncing back. And I think you just described that so beautifully of like what we're really forced to confront at this time.
It's actually kind of genius, right? Because most women look at it as like a punishment. The Chinese word for the 4th trimester, or actually the 40-day period, most cultures have like a 40-day period. So is directly translated as confinement. But if you talk about it, people are like, well, don't say that, because who wants to be confined, right? Like that's like everything we've been fighting against is like, get us out of that feeling of restriction and confinement to ultimate freedom. But that period of confinement, I don't actually mind the word, but I'm also not one to sugarcoat stuff. Because really, women need to be confined. And what women do, and I'm not blaming anyone because I understand why people are doing it. I just get really frustrated because even women who have the information just don't think it applies to them. And there are so many reasons for that total confinement period. And when I say total confinement, I really mean it. I mean like barely going out of your house. And it includes all these things that we think we have to do, like doctor's appointments and all of the things that women line up as self-care. It's like, no, if you're driving across Los Angeles for your acupuncture appointment at 3 weeks postpartum, no, stay in your house. Like just stay in your house. Don't do it. I mean, there's so much to say, but so it's the Vata element that goes out of balance postpartum, and Vata is the wind. So it's the thing that makes you feel scattered, makes you feel separate from your center, makes your thoughts feel airy, and makes you feel displaced. But it also gives you a large sense of connection. The thing is, if you then go running around, you're just going to amp the Vata even more. And if you don't believe in any of that stuff, listen to what women say after they have a baby. They say, I feel scattered. I feel out of sorts. I feel like I'm falling apart. I feel like my organs are going to drop out of me. Yes, because you're not supposed to be walking around, really. Midwives say 5 days in the bed, 5 days on the bed, 5 days around the bed. So that's 15 days in your bedroom. And then really for the next period of time, it's like minimizing movements, minimizing excess Vata so that your body can use all that energy for repair. And then guess what? Of course, it's not like 40 days and then there's like a magic wand and there's fairy music that starts and then all of a sudden you're just better. No, it's a transition. But if you respect that and you actually really pull your energy in and you find a way to delight in that, like you find a way that it's like really delicious to be able to just be lazy and be with your baby and help you co-regulate each other and work through whatever happened at the birth, right? Because birth's not been so easy for women these days either, that you have time to process that stuff and you have people that are serving you so that you can connect with your baby. This other part of postpartum care is, it's driving me insane. Like now people know they want postpartum doulas, but they hire postpartum doulas to basically be baby nurses. And it's like, if you want a baby nurse, get a baby nurse. But if you want a postpartum doula, that person takes care of you. That person gives you massages, sets up vagina steams for you, makes you food, organizes your house if that's what makes you feel good, takes care of your other child. It's about you. It's not about hiring someone to figure out your baby's sleep cycle for you, right? If you have someone that's taking care of you, then you have resilience at night, right? Like this whole thing too about like women are sleep deprived when they have babies. Yes. Who on earth ever had a baby and thought they were going to get normal sleep? I mean, it's part of becoming a parent. And it's not a punishment. It's not like, and it's not the same as losing sleep because of insomnia, or because people tell me, well, I really need my sleep. Well, yeah, so do I. Who doesn't? Who's going to say I don't really need sleep? Everybody does. There's liminal states. There's spaces in between when you're with a baby, and you have access to other information, also something not highly valued. So I want women to be able to redefine this. And the other judgment people have is like, it's so princessy, or this is just so privileged. Like, it's so privileged that you could have this. Well, maybe, but also look at people who are quote unquote poor. They live in multi-generational households a lot of the time, or they live in really close proximity with other poor people. And there's people who aren't working. We need people who aren't working, because who else is going to be the ones to help out unless everything's just going to become monetized? So we're in a cultural bottleneck, and it's frustrating. People read my book and they get mad because they're like, great, that's really great. And like, I have no idea how to do that. And I get it, because I'm also in a cultural bottleneck as a single parent. And like, okay, so how do you do that? How do you maintain a social life, have a career, and spend as much time with your kid as you want to when you're one person? But this is where we're at, and we can't wait. It's funny because people are like, well, maternity leave and this and that. Yes, it sucks. But most of the people listening to your podcast, I would bet money on it that most of them have pretty decent leave, and that a lot of them are freelancers. And so they could actually set it up in a certain way. But even so, I work with so many women who had like 3 to 6 months leave and didn't take it.
Yeah. In your book, you say 25% of American women go back to work 10 days after giving birth. That was like shocking to me.
Yeah, it's horrible. I mean, it's horrible. And it shows how, as a culture, it's this gigantic blind spot. However, it is on the presidential dockets. It was in the last election. It will be on this one. If people are talking about it, people were never talking about this before. It was just what was happening. And women are starting to demand different, because they're seeing each other break down. There's, and they're going, this is insane. And they're seeing what happens in Europe, where people get 6 months, 1 year. To Sweden, each parent gets a year. So they could each have their child for 2 years with just one of the parents doing the caretaking and being paid for that,
Yeah. Well, I love your point about redefining this period on our own terms. And one of the things that I love that you said in your book was, sex, birth, and trauma are tangible entry points to reclaiming your individual wholeness and to reconnecting to healthy power. And we talk a lot about trauma on this podcast, because my work of battling food, it all comes back to these, trauma patterns that people are trying to reenact through dieting, et cetera. And what I love that you said is, you said, trauma is simply part of being human. Fortunately, healing is also a hallmark of being human. And I just love that, because people get scared about the word trauma, right? They think it's like, oh, irreparable damage. I think of the metaphor to your point, like women are walking around saying, well, I can't run without peeing anymore, or I feel my organs and this is just normal, right? And we're in this period where we're unnormalizing that. And so how, if we can look at that fourth trimester as a chance to face ourselves and kind of these beliefs about it's too privileged to get help, or I don't have the time from work to take, we can really use this as like a chance to like get clear about what we really need. Is that not true? Or
yeah, we can use it as a chance to repair a whole lot of things. We can repair our relationship, our early attachment. And so much of that attachment is exactly our ability to ask for help, or to believe that help is available if we need it, and believe that we don't have to do everything on our own, and to centralize our experience. It's the time for women to centralize our own pleasure. Sex after birth needs to become non-penetration oriented for a while, which really makes female pleasure kind of the center of it. I don't think that's an accident. I think it's a huge opportunity for maturation. And that's what we need as we become parents. So it's hard, because we're losing ways that we used to do things, and that seemed like they worked, or we liked them, or we didn't even really realize until they sort of got shaken loose. But if we can stay open and we can stay honest and transparent about what's happening as it's happening, we don't get stuck. And I really believe that if women had what they needed postpartum, which in the book I talk about the 5 universal needs, which are rest foundationally, and then mineral-rich, nutrient-dense food, loving touch, contact with wise women, and nature. If women had those things, any birth could be processed. So no matter how quote-unquote traumatic a birth was, a woman after those 40 days of having those intensive needs met would be on the other side of that. But what we see is that the exact opposite, where women come out of it sometimes even more traumatized, because not only has the birth trauma not gotten resolved, but on top of that now there's other difficulties because it's impossible for the body to repair if it's under chronic stress.
Yeah. So a theme that I'm really hearing is when you have the foundations, right, you become more resilient. And in that resilience is this capacity for healing, whether it's lack of sleep. Yeah. And if you can have these other things, it makes it more manageable, right? You could have a traumatic birth. And if you can get the help you need, that helps you process it. And so it sounds like by not taking the 4th trimester, we're really setting ourselves up long-term for this lack of resilience that we can access if we take the time for it. But then we start to think we have all these other problems when they're just symptoms of kind of a depleted cup, if we're going to use a metaphor.
Yeah. And that at this specific window of time, it's a power-packed time. So it can work for you also. When you put the right ingredients into that time, in Ayurveda, they say 42 days for 42 years. So if you have what you need and your system becomes more robust, then you're rebuilding a more vital system. But on the other hand, if there's a lot of disease, then you're setting yourself up for more difficulty. And, I should say that I agree 100% with what I wrote, which is good, because sometimes you look back on stuff and you're like, okay, well, I grew. That's good.
Yeah.
But there's going to be people listening to this that have already had a baby and that didn't listen and that are like, oh, well, now what? Am I just screwed? No, I didn't either. It's not that I didn't listen. I just had no idea. And a lot of people listening don't have any idea. We're in a place where we're really trying to repair this fabric. So there's always opportunities for repair. That's what my online courses are about. I love vaginal steaming for many reasons. I think that can serve as a repair. There's people who practice birth-story medicine. Every time you have a period, if you really rest, you can use those windows of time to do this same kind of repair and restore. So there's always opportunities. It's just that front-loaded, if people are listening, and at some point, I need to have a call that's just for partners, because if partners really knew how important this was, because a lot of times women are like, well, yeah, I want this, but my husband doesn't want to spend the money on that or this or that. And it's like, I know that intimacy is important for almost all partners. And that's the elephant in the room that everyone's wondering about. Are they ever going to have sex again? And how's it going to be? And especially if they had a long fertility journey and there was already a bunch of pressure put on sex. If partners really understood how critical this time is and how they could have a partner that actually was more radiant, like not the stereotype of course it's messy and of course there's like lots of changes, but you really just can't underestimate how important it is to covet that time. And you can't get it back. And that's the truth of it. You can't get any moments back, but that time specifically, it's just so important.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of another archetype. I think it's starting to shift, especially if we get into this embodiment and pleasure, but women were kind of recognized when they were a martyr, right? So it was like, oh, I will sacrifice for you. And so it kind of created this either or, like either I get my needs met or I'm not a martyr. And now what I hear you saying is like, when a woman gets her needs met, everybody wins. It's not like they're taking away from people or they can't still, everyone wins in the long run. That's how I hear it.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that we put a lot of pressure now that we want equality, right? That means a whole bunch of different things, but there's a lot of pressure on the partner to be the doula and to be this equal partner. And it's shocking for a lot of women when after they have a baby, I mean, I know one of my first thoughts in the first hour, I told my mom, I was just like, this is bullshit. Like, I can't believe anyone even ever tried to tell me that there was a semblance of equality. We're from different planets. Like, all of a sudden it was like the female experience there's nothing alike. That's how I felt immediately after I gave birth. So to put all these expectations on partners, like all of a sudden they're supposed to know how to do everything domestic and take care of you. And they also sometimes have jobs. The community support that I'm advocating for is for everyone. Now, I've seen people go overboard, and then like if they have a postpartum doula, that person gives both people massages. And then I've heard people talking about the partners getting postpartum depression and, whatever. I support the woman so that it's her body that needs repairing. And fundamentally, this is the most embodied experience you can ever have besides being born or dying. Your body literally gets divided, whether it gets divided surgically or it gets separated down the middle. It's a complete reformation. So it is the realm of women generally. And that's hugely controversial in these days where gender is being completely defined and there needs to be space for non-binary and all of that. But in general, it's not healthy for the relationship. For instance, I've seen babies crying, and then the baby gets passed back and forth to the mom, to the dad, to the mom, to the dad, to the mom, to the dad. And what really needs to happen is that the mom needs to be with the baby and the dad needs to be supporting the mom. So it's a tiered system. There's built-in attunement for a reason. And we don't like to hear that because, again, we like to think, well, dads can bond with babies and all that. Of course they can. But the dad's not feeding the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And the dad didn't give birth to the baby, and the baby didn't live in the dad's body for 9 to 10 months. So it's a place where biology trumps ideology, and we don't like that.
Yeah, I think that's because inherently we don't value feminine qualities. It's like we can be separate but equal. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like that's a conversation that's getting missed. And again, yeah, there is non-binary, there is, gender is socialized, but then there's the sex of biology that is not the condition of being gendered. And I think it's about everyone realizing they have a role and it's all important versus we're all born into this hierarchical system, which is kind of another root cause issue. But that's really big picture and systemic, I guess, more than the everyday.
It influences how people experience it, though, because, women are having babies later in life. So our ego structures are way more crystallized. Yeah, and our sense of independence, right? I mean, 3 generations ago, women didn't have a choice about how they spent their time. And now it's a much different kind of a transition. But this expectation that somehow we're all equally suited to the same roles really it gets put on the chopping block at this time. And I've seen women really struggling with that in a way that's disruptive to their relationship, disruptive to the bonding, because they say things like, well, I don't want to be the translator for my partner. And it's like, okay, but he's at work all day and you're at home, but you expect him to just come home and then just slip right in and know exactly how to do things your way. Because that's the other thing. Women are not very gracious about allowing the partner to also have their own way of doing things.
Yeah. What I've seen with my clients often is like the noble resistance for not asking help is, well, I can do it better, or they're not going to do it the way I want to. And I'm like, well, have you ever asked exactly for what you wanted?
Yeah.
No. I'm like, okay, well, people need direction. We need direction as females, and males need direction. Like everyone needs clarity, right? It's like, that's not even a biological thing.
But also, I wholeheartedly agree that we need to ask for what we need. And it's so hard. It gets so challenging because if you haven't practiced before and then you feel you're in a weakened state and you feel desperate, and it's really hard. So I'm not saying it's easy. It was really hard for me. It was very hard for me to realize that I didn't have anything to give or to give back, and that I just needed to take because I was so depleted and alone. But I also do want people listening to really challenge themselves to have a broader vision about what they want, because parenting, and I have a pretty strong point of view about this, I think, because I've done almost all of the parenting. Like, I lived with my daughter's father till she was 9 months old, but the rest of the time it's just been the two of us. It's not just perfectionism and like, oh, it has to be done this way and my way and this is the right way. But it's also, it's a real privilege and a benefit for a child to have two figures, two people, two ways, two models. There's no reason that it has to be the same. So I really find women to be so hard on their partners. And especially in the fourth trimester, it's like everyone's figuring it out. No one knows how. I mean, it's a new being. There's no formula for it. So everyone is in the process of discovery, and really respecting that the other person has their way and just let them do it their way. Because the more you micromanage and the more you criticize, number one, the less sexual polarity is, because now you're mothering two people. And just check yourself. Are you really that sure that your way is the best way? And I mean, I can say it. I only really teach the things that I know about, because in Brazil, like, my ex-husband was spitting on red thread and then putting it on my daughter's forehead. And I was like, what are you doing? And it was supposed to be like a solution to hiccups. You know, I mean, every part of me was just like, okay, that's so crazy and so weird. But it was also just like, well, or in Brazil, the first food they give babies, drum roll, is orange juice. I was like, orange juice? Like, everything I know about orange juice is like it spikes your blood sugar, and I didn't want to give sugar first. But then I had to step back and be like, there's a nation full of people who had orange juice as their first food and they're fine, you know?
Yeah.
And for him, it was like, avocado. Are you kidding me? Like, what are you doing? You know, he just couldn't believe it either. So it was easier for me because I was with someone from another culture. So of course there was going to be things that totally surprised us. But maybe you should imagine that your partner's from another culture, because, I mean, ultimately, I think that having a child can bring a couple closer together instead of driving a wedge between them. But what I see in people's behavior is like, well, no wonder things aren't going well, because the woman's anxiety and stress, largely based on birth outcomes and then no fourth trimester plans, gets all directed towards the partner.
When I think this comes back to, I mean, I work on with clients a lot of like breaking all or nothing thinking, which to me is really just a sign that you're, you know, in a fight or flight state, right? And that's how it kind of manifests itself, that we can recognize in one way. And often I think because we don't have that resilience that is so important to develop in the fourth trimester, we have a lack of sense of safety, right? Because of everything, the stakes are so high with everything. Like, if you breastfeed, if you drink orange juice or not, and yes, you may have ideal outcomes, and yet you probably lose the ability to feel safe in the big picture in the long run if you don't have that. Like, the way that you're viewing things is so much more stressful and all or nothing because you aren't coming from a resilient, restored place.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. It's like, I love your point about nobody knows how to come out of this transition, because every baby's different, every couple's different, every situation's different. And I see the more safe people feel, the more capacity they can be with uncertainty. And the less they are with like my way or your way, or in my work, we talk about getting to that collaborative space where it's like, it's kind of this evolving co-creation rather than kind of preconceived ideas of what will work. So you had mentioned earlier about the 5 universal postpartum needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like we've made this strong case for it and all the, like, a lot of the sticky stuff that comes up. And so are you saying that even though we're using the word trimester, which is typically 3 months, this is for 42 days. And like you said, there's no magic wand of time. However, if we're thinking of the fourth trimester, it really is those 6 weeks postpartum. And obviously, hopefully longer. However, if you're going to start somewhere, this is where to start. And can you talk a little bit about those 5 universal postpartum needs that you go over? And obviously the book gives you much more detail, but extended rest, nourishing food, loving touch, the presence of wise women, and contact with nature.
Mm-hmm. There's also a book out that's called The Fifth Trimester now. It's about the transition back to work. Yeah. The point of the term itself was to help people start thinking that just because the baby's out of the body doesn't mean that the interdependence is done. So
beautiful.
There's a saying that makes me cringe, but a lot of women have said it to me, is that they feel like once they have the baby that the candy's out of the wrapper and then the wrapper just gets thrown away. And so if you look at a bookshelf, what you see is lots of pregnancy books, and then it just goes directly to parenting and infant books. So the woman's process, some pregnancy books have 1 or 2 pages at the end on postpartum, but it's a way to understand from both the mother's and the baby's point of view that just because the baby's out of your body doesn't mean that there's any less need for contact and co-regulation, basically. So how that looks is really different. If you were going to ask somebody, how long is the postpartum period, you would hear all different answers to that. Some people say 9 months because that's when most babies are crawling, and so they could crawl to an independent food source. So they're defining it based on baby behavior. Every woman that you ask, if you asked her, say she had 3 babies, it would probably be different each time, but there might be some similar markers like, some people say when they wean, that's when they really feel their life force come back. But the important thing is that those 42 days are respected as much as possible. I've also worked with women who had twins at 32 weeks, and then they call me at 11 weeks, and they're devastated because they've got a prolapse and other things are happening. And my answer to that is, okay, your children were born at 32 weeks. That means that really you're like 3 weeks postpartum right now. So you need to get back in bed. You need to not self-diagnose. And if you're feeling like your organs are dropping, don't worry about it. Organs move around. Start steaming and take care of those 5 needs. And then at the 12-week mark, we'll talk again. I made the needs to be like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can have all of the 4 needs above, but if you don't have the rest, your body actually can't repair. I've worked with people with diastasis, which is where your midline abdominal wall separates, and they're doing everything. They're doing the right exercises. They're eating the right foods. They're doing everything right. And the only way they heal is when they just stop everything, go back, stay close to home, really stop pushing. And the thing is it's a time of total reevaluation. So things that used to be able to make us feel good might not be the right things anymore. So that's why women get out and run, for instance, at 4 weeks, because they're feeling pretty good, and running used to make them feel good. And it's not too bad. They could get a little of the extra baby weight off, and then they have a big regression, or nothing happens. And then at 6 months, they throw their back out and they can't get their back in line because they never did the reparative part.
I love the context that you bring to this of like, right? Like we have to look at your situation and then go from there. I think that's so important because again, I just feel like the medical community tries to standardize us into like this widget formula, right? But you're like, if you go early, you have to add time onto that. And then really looking at
the type of birth you have. Some people have their baby at 38 weeks and they have a relatively quick birth and they have no perineal tearing. The birth more or less went with how their expectations were. That recovery process is going to be a lot different than someone who took public transportation to the hospital, was induced, got sent back home, had an episiotomy that they thought wasn't even done anymore in the 2000s. Having a 48-hour birth or a 6-hour birth is really different from a recovery perspective. So the problem is that if you leave the hospital, they basically just say, take care of yourself. But none of us know what that means postpartum because we haven't experienced that before. So take care of yourself. What does that really mean? Just people don't know. I was a yoga teacher. So, people show up at a yoga class 2 weeks postpartum and you're just like, what are you doing here? But what they're doing is they're going back to the place that they once felt good. And they're really trying to figure out how to organize themselves. And because there's an absence of support, like the presence of wise women are like people who are able to have these conversations with you. Somebody who would tell you, no, you can't go out of the house, get back in bed. And let's talk about this. Oh, you're feeling anxious. Okay. What have you had to eat today? You know, there's just so many aspects to it. There isn't any pat formula, but there is a formula to healing. You know, how long that takes, we can't quantify. But if we do the things in the first 40 days, I mean, I wish I had all the money in the world so that I could conduct all the research. We did conduct a research called the 4th Trimester Vaginal Steam Study. And you can go there and you can read the results of the study, which were fairly significant, but it was just a very small sample size. And we bootstrapped it, me and Steamy Chick, Kelly Garza. So we crowdfunded and then we paid for a lot of it. And it's expensive and it's hard to do studies, and especially with birth, because, you know, we had a window to do it and then some people had cesareans. And if you have a cesarean, you can't steam postpartum. And then this is why it's hard to do studies with pregnancy and birth. But I am positive that if I did a study and let's say took 100 women and 50 of them ate certain foods, had a once a week visit from a midwife or a postpartum doula or a wise woman, steamed sequentially from day 4, as long as their uterine arteries were sealed, to day 40, I'm positive that like the group that had those things would have almost no postpartum depression and almost 100% physical healing at that point.
I love that, because I think this kind of brings full circle what we started talking about, because all of that is about receiving, right? And I think even about the extended rest that you said in the beginning, this is not about being productive, but it's more about how we're being, and to be resting and, you know, receiving nourishing food and the conversations with wise women. And even when you go out in nature, right? Like nature kind of does the work for you to calm you down, at least for me. It totally confronts everything that we've told is not to be valued about ourselves, right? The beingness, the productivity. So I love looking at it as someone who's a little type A, but getting better, like a challenge to like welcome this side into you of more of a being, and that can set you up. And I love your point. I think it's so powerful for everyone to understand is you aren't going to be the same person afterwards, right? And being open to curiosity and letting kind of your own wisdom like guide you, instead of, I loved how you talked about in like the magazines and the media, they kind of reduce pregnancy and parenthood and motherhood to like a weight gain and weight loss challenge rather than all this potential transformation that could happen. And I think that's so important, and we need to honor your wisdom and read the book. So thank you so much for being here, Kimberly. Is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up? I mean, I want everyone to know where they can find you, and in the show notes, we'll have a link to your book and your website. Do you have anything, encouraging words to leave us with? Because you gave us so much to think about.
The same body that you have now is the same body that you're going to birth with. And it's the same body that you make love with. And it's the same body that you do your big work with. So foundationally, we're really talking about our ability to reside in okayness, you know, to have a deep system level capacity for pleasure as well. So I would just offer to people that we start doing the work together of dismantling our what's wrong attention, and always thinking what's good for us is to figure out really what's wrong with us and what's the problem, and really start looking at what is right and what we can build on. That's a radical shift for most of us, whether it's your spiritual path or shadow work or coaching, is really kind of about, okay, well, let's get to the root of the problem. And that's a lot of the time not very useful.
Got it. Yeah. It reminds me of the next phase in trauma-informed care is what's right with you, right? Not what happened to you, but what's right with you often as a result. So Thank you so much. I love thinking about that. What's right? It makes me think of honoring our biology rather than fighting it and honoring what we're needing. Where can people find you, Kimberly?
I'm magamama.com, magamama.com. Maga means sorceress in Portuguese, so it's not connected to our current leader. And on Instagram, Magamama is MAGAMAMAS. If you go to magamama.com/trauma-transcendence, I have an hour class that's on nervous system regulation and on common misperceptions about how we have been taught that the nervous system works, but it's actually not true. So that's kind of a good starting point if you're wanting to learn more about the nervous system. And I think that nervous system regulation is the number one preparation for birth, because contractions are upregulation and downregulation, activation, deactivation. So if you start to learn to ride those mini waves and recognize them, that's one of the best ways you can prepare for birth.
I love that, because that's another big theme I got from your book. It's like, yeah, we can focus on the fourth trimester, but we're never just starting and stopping, right? You're never just beginning. It's just a continuation. So it's important to come into the postpartum period as powerful as you can. And that doesn't mean everything's going your way. It just means understanding and having choice. So I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. And I love that you talk about nervous system, because that's a lot of what my work is about. And I also appreciate you saying that MAGA Mama is not associated with the current regime. I appreciate that. Thanks for pointing that out. Thanks so much for being here, Kimberly.
Thank you. Good luck with your upcoming mysterious transition.
Thank you. I'm kind of viewing it that way. Just no expectations, which is hopefully a healthy place to be. Be prepared, but no expectations. Thank you so much. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.